Hello, everyone. So, just a quick show of hands out of curiosity. How many of you folks have ever been involved in organizing a conference before? A few hands there. So, you know, conferences get a little bit complicated sometimes, and sometimes a little bit rushed last minute. So there was, for this particular talk, when I suggested that I do this talk here, they said yes. And unfortunately, because of the way timing worked out, it turns out I discovered last week I have a 45-minute talk for a 70-minute slot, and it's the final big talk in the big room. And that's okay. I can do that because I speak. This is what I do. There is one little problem, however, that when people say, you want to make Perl great again, do great things with Perl and let people know about it. Well, we are doing great things, but they're behind the scenes they don't see. I'm trying to do something great with our team and let people know about it. It's a commercial product, so you're about to watch 70 minutes of an advertisement, and I feel really awkward. Just to let you know why it might seem a little bit different from other talks, but it happens at conferences. So I want to say, first of all, welcome to Tau Station. And I hope you've been enjoying the conference formerly known as YAPSI. So my name is Curtis Poe, better known as Ovid, with All Around the World. And we go into companies and we fix things for them. We build new systems, we fix their test suites, we refactor their legacy systems, we do training, we teach them how to do testing, we do all sorts of things. And so if you ever want to hire us, just drop me a line. But we're also trying to build a universe. And the question here is, what does modeling a universe mean? We're not talking about, the logarithmic spirals of galaxies is based upon the Fibonacci constant that you also see modeled in Nautilus shells and pine cones. That's not what we're doing. When we say modeling a universe, we're building a game, a universe for people to live in, and we're talking about modeling the sort of behavior you might engage in something like this. But I want to talk about that beer bottle sitting up there, and Cahirden. So back in 2006, when I was getting my first job in the UK, I had to go through, getting my work permit, getting entry clearance, talking to previous employers, and getting letters of recommendation from them saying that yes, he can do what he promises that he can do. And my previous company ran out of money, and so I had several months where I had to figure out how to spend as little as possible. And my friend Schwerin said, "Have you tried World of Warcraft?" Okay, so I tried it. And I knew that games like this are one of the most cost-effective things you can do with your money. And I was playing, and one day this Horde character jumped me and almost killed me when this other character named Slinity on the Alliance side jumped out, and with him, we beat the Horde character. And we became friends online, and he said, "Why don't you join our guild, Disposable Hero?" This was on the Twisting Nether PvP server back in the US, though I think it's been moved to the UK now. And the leader of the guild was someone named Cahirden. I got to know Cahirden over the next few months. Online, he became kind of a friend. He was easy to talk to. We talked about politics, and we talked about life. He liked to role-play a drunken paladin, which was interesting because he was a 17-year-old kid. He would help out the other members of the guild. Sometimes he'd travel to areas well below his level to help them finish missions. He helped hold the guild together in the face of a hostile guild takeover. And he was often gone for several days at a time, which is generally not a good trait in a leader. But we were okay with that because we knew he was in the hospital. And we knew he had a very serious heart problem. So one day, he's been gone for several days, and then Cahirden pops online again. "Hey, Cahirden, how you doing?" I'm Cahirden's brother. Cahirden was in the hospital and given his username and password to his brother so that he could turn over guild leadership to my friend Slinity. And Cahirden was dead. One of his last acts in life was making sure his online friends were taken care of. We didn't know what to do. This was really, really tough. But he was a friend. So this beer is for my drunken paladin friend Cahirden. Godspeed wherever or whatever you are. Oh, boy, that's awkward. The Kama Citra beer got a little bit too excited. Oh, whoops, sorry, I probably shouldn't have said that. So that's what the beer is for. Also, that story really, it's difficult for me because it's not just that Cahirden passed away. You know, his parents, I'm a father. You know, the idea of parents losing their children, it's tough. It's really tough. And people think about the game industry, and what a lot of companies think about is the fact that as of 2016, this was a $10th of $1 trillion a year industry. It's a lot of money. It's also a lot of people. Games change in response to what people are doing, but people also change in response to what games are doing. And it's really interesting once you start digging into this. So this entire thing was, I've always wanted to be able to say thank you to Cahirden for really showing me an aspect of this, which is really important. And I often wonder what happened to my friends in the guild, but that's what the beer was for. Question policy for the talk. Now that the bad stuff is over. Please, I'm sorry, hold your questions to the end. There's a lot of material that I want to cover, and I want to make sure that we can get through all of it. I apologize for that. If you go out to taostation.space, you'll discover a little bit more about the game. We've got a blog out there that you can start reading material on. We're building a universe. It's text-based. Runs in browser and mobile, of course, like that. It's accessible because we want blind people to be able to play it. If you're in a quadriplegic and you have to navigate the web with a sip and puff device, or some people, they have a stick and they tap the keyboard, we want you to be able to play it. It's hard to do that sometimes, but we think it's important. And it's also free to play. And we use the fair play model, which if you're in the industry or you're familiar with it, you may know what that means. But basically, it means no level caps, no pay to win. But the story, I think the story is really interesting. I was trying to find, the reason this came about is I was trying to find the game that I wanted to play, and I couldn't. I wanted to find some good text-based sci-fi. And hundreds of years in the future, mankind has spread throughout the galaxy. And they entered what's called a post-scarcity society, which has some effects in the game. I won't even go into that right now. But basically, they were spreading throughout the galaxy. We had reached the pinnacle of existence when all of a sudden the catastrophe struck. Planetary defense systems turned on planets, ships' reactors went critical, airlocks were being vented, databases were being purged. Most of humanity was wiped out in hours. Humanity was on the verge of being extinct, and bam, it stopped. A couple of generations, no one knows why. And they would really like to, because that's kind of an important thing. Humanity's been reduced to a sphere about 40 light years across. They're rebuilding civilization, so you can think kind of Mad Max meets Firefly with a dash of The Expanse thrown in if you're, into sci-fi. The universe we're building is huge. 117 stars within 20 light years of Earth. That actually turns out to be a hard question to answer, which won't go into now. We have over 500 stations. There's over around 10,000 areas, social networking, blogs, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of stuff we're doing in this. But the alpha is going to be much more constrained because, people actually have to be able to play the thing, and we want to get this out the door. So we're limiting it. It's going to be Alpha Centauri and Sol, 14 stations, over 200 areas, numerous missions, and some features obviously are going to be missing. But most of you probably don't know about the game industry. Let's talk about that a little bit. So this is, there's so much which could be said about this, and this following slide is awful. Yeah, that's the awful emoji symbol. So the game industry, there's always exceptions, but top-tier MMORPGs generally tend to cost around $20 million to $100 million to make. They often have teams of about 50 to 500 people, and they take 3 to 5 years. We don't have those resources, obviously. But to give you an idea, Star Wars: The Old Republic, that one took $200 million to make, and was about 5 years, I think, in development. World of Warcraft, the most popular of all time, 4.5 years, $63 million. A lot of money gets poured into these things. But the game industry itself is horribly, horribly broken because it's a $10th of $1 trillion. Everyone is rushing in there, and they're getting really exciting. So like in 2015, everybody and their dog was trying to make a mobile first-person shooter. They all failed. Then after that, everyone's switching over to multiplayer online battle arena, League of Legends clones for mobile. They all failed. We have one of the world's top free-to-play experts working with us now, a guy named Toit Weidman. He's wonderful. He talks about how in 2016, 90% of his clients were trying to make a card battler. Game becomes popular, other people find out about it, literally thousands of clones or duplicates get started around that time, and hundreds of them get to the market, so you've got hundreds of people competing for the same market space for a vanishing pool of players, and it doesn't work. These games they fail one after another, and a lot of companies go bankrupt because of this. By accident, because I was looking for the game I wanted to play and I couldn't, I discovered there was a huge hole in the market in one particular space that was really fascinating to me, that I had a lot of passion about, but the question is this lack of supply or lack of demand? You know, if it's one way, we're fine. If it's the other way, we could be in some trouble. But I think we're actually going to be doing okay. We go to conferences, and industry experts are like, what? Why would anybody want to play that? Okay, what are you building? Card battler? So we're not too worried about that because lots of people are very excited about the idea. And if the industry, which is following everyone else, is running that way, and we're running that way, we think we got something. But what do we got? So back in 2010 was when I made my first commit. I think I was living in Pimlico in London at the time. And then shortly after that, I was making some more commits. I was living with my fiancée in Finsbury Park in northern London. Last meaningful commit for a while was February later on. By that time, I'm living in Amsterdam. We had moved to Amsterdam, had a baby, I had a book contract, then we moved to Paris. Then, so that's yet another move. Then moved to La Rochelle, made a blog post about the game, stuff happened. We decided to make that an official company project, hired our first official employee. And then I started writing the first version of this talk in Bordeaux, and I flew out of Bordeaux to get here, and I'm going to be flying back to Nice because my wife is busy moving right now while I'm standing on this stage. So we've got other things on our mind. But around the beginning of this year, we understood enough about the game industry out of a lot of research. We had avoided a lot of the first-person, the free-to-play mistakes that a lot of other companies did. We did a lot of research in virtual worlds. We avoided those mistakes. And like I said, we have one of the top industry experts working with us now. He's really excited about the project. And we decided to convert this to an internal project, managed the way we manage our external projects. And today we have 19 people working on the game to forestall the question that everybody asks. And so it's 2 artists and designers, 3 front-end developers with an accessibility background because we think that's important. There's 5 back-end developers who all passed our Perl test. Our Perl test is not easy to pass. And so we got awesome people working on that. We have 2 DevOps sysadmins, 4 narrative designers. Toit Weidman's doing a lot of our free-to-play design on part of that. We have a senior community builder, a producer, and that's not counting the legal, the accounting, and all the other stuff involved with this. It's a big project. It's taking us a while. And we're doing it at a fraction of what everyone else is doing. So we're pretty happy about that. But these things are complex, and it's a work in progress. That is our inventory system. Everything red is stuff not done. That's actually, the red stuff probably is done by now. That's a bit of an older slide. This is what we call a game flow diagram to track the complex nature of just this one tiny piece. These are the tickets for our chat system alone. I mean, these things are complicated. You just have no idea how complicated these things are until you get into them. But even though it's text-based, we have a really great artist. I love a lot of the art that we have. So there's your character page. I had to shrink that down because actually there's a whole bunch of information we track about people. You can go out there, you get a job, you can get a career in a bunch of different areas. You can take side jobs, which are kind of like mini quests along the simplicity of what you'd find in Warcraft. All sorts of things you can do. The bank, if you want to store your money. I'm just going to walk through some of the art real quick. There's our brig. There's a brig background. There's a sick bay. There's a sick bay background. There's a clone vat. There's a clone vat background. Gym background. For any of these pages, that's the university, relax on the bar. For any of these pages, there's a button at the bottom. You can click it, and it'll make the game go away. You can just look at the beautiful art in the background. Because we want this to look as nice as possible. We want this to be an immersive world that you can really get into and enjoy. And I don't think you can really see it terribly well, but one of the details I appreciate is back there, you can see an open window that, not open, obviously, but people are looking out the window, and you can actually see the atmospheric haze over the planet as part of the detail that we're paying attention to, little things like that. We have spaceships, of course. And this is a map of all the stars within 20 light years of Earth. So I wrote that in JavaScript, and our front-end devs laughed at me and rewrote it. You can't see it on this screen, but the colors of the stars are astronomically correct. because those details are important. If you were to play the game, you'll learn all the stars within 20 light years of Earth. Have fun with that. This is what it looks like if you have a screen reader. Obviously, that JavaScript star map is not going to work if you're blind. If you have a screen reader, it's still going to be tough, but you can play it. But let's talk about quests. So here's a typical World of Warcraft quest. It's called Aggression, level 4 Horde. Go out, kill 14 things. Doesn't that just get your blood stirring? Yeah, yeah. Here's one of our quests. Our quests are a little bit non-linear, so we call them missions. So we have a number of different types. The really beautiful literary quests, the handcrafted ones, can take you in all sorts of different directions. And just for a moment, I want to explain a mission that I designed that probably is not going to make it into the game for reasons I won't go into right now, but it's called the Trophy Wife. You're sitting in a bar in Daedalus Station, and there's a woman the other side of the bar, and you think she's really interesting because there's a mission symbol floating next to her name. And so you go and you sidle up to this woman and you click on her, and and you discover that she's very beautiful, but that's the least interesting thing about her because she's very intelligent and she's kind of upset because she committed suicide. So as you're talking to her, you discover that basically when she was young, she met this man who eventually became very wealthy, very powerful, and very abusive. And he treated her terribly, and she had nothing. She had no way to get out. So what she did was she canceled her cloning contract and very illicitly got another cloning contract, which he didn't know about, siphoned off some money from his accounts, put it somewhere else, killed herself, woke up in her new clone, and now she's on this station. She's got plenty of money. She's far away from him, but she's pretty upset because she looks up on the screen and she sees that her husband's there on the screen with her at his side. Will you take this mission or not? So you do some further investigation. I'm not giving anything away because, like I said, this probably won't get into the game. What you find out is you can't have two clones at the same time. The cloning technology doesn't work that way. But pre-catastrophe, there was a medical stasis box where if someone suffered some sort of catastrophic death, you could shove them in the medical stasis box, it would put them in stasis, and nanites would rebuild their body if they could. Post-catastrophe, people don't really have the knowledge of how to handle that. So the technology still exists. You put them in the box, you bring them out, and in her case, she came out pretty severely brain damaged. He found his dead wife's body, put her in the stasis box, brought her back, and now she's pretty brain damaged, but she can kind of pass the Turing test, say hi, it functions. She's still there because he's not going to let her go. And what are you going to do? Are you going to try and convince this woman who doesn't remember that she had this illicit cloning license or that she had siphoned off money to go meet her suicided self? You're going to go tell the original woman, maybe you can make a lot of money and tell the man, your wife actually, she resurrected somewhere else. There is no happy ending to this story. It is a horrifying story. That's the sort of stuff that we support. I've also asked our narrative team, can you come up with some happy stories too? But that's the richness of stuff that we want to support. Now, in this particular case, I talked about the trophy wife. So let's talk about issues of just gender and sexuality and things like that, which are always difficult. They're going to come up in the game because they're part of life, not because we want you to have to go through and deal with this. But in the real world, sometimes things like that crop up. We're not here to lecture you. We don't want anything like that. But even though gender might exist with some of the characters of the game, here's what we're not going to do. Gender, it turns out, is very complicated. This is from our website, male, female, Canadian applicant. So we're not actually doing this. One of the things I decided when we first created this game is there will be no checkbox for string bikini armor. You can't choose your gender. Just describe yourself any way you want. We're going to move forward because we'll cover these issues in the game, but all that silliness with how the characters are defined, you get to choose it. It's entirely up to you. What the hell is he talking about? Come on. So new game devs. New game devs. When you first get into the industry, they say don't build the game you want to build. That's the advice given to every new game dev because everyone gets into the industry because they want to build the game they want to build. That's actually not a problem. Go ahead and build the game you want to build. You're going to make some mistakes. You'll learn something. You go back, you do it again. The advice should be don't build an MMORPG as your first game. So back when I was doing this, pretty much by myself, There was our original gym. There was the early cockpit view. There was the port. The great thing about these screens is they tell you don't hire Ovid for graphic design. That's what the port looks like. That's what the port looks like now. So I don't think you can get enough detail there, but it gives you an idea. And I just love our artwork. That's another view of the port. That's the ruins of a space station, some detail there. I know it's a little bit dark. It's not coming out quite as well as I'd like. But the goal, we're trying to build a top-tier MMORPG with the richness and complexity of other top-tier MMORPGs, but we want to create a universe that you can live in, that you can have fun with online in a way that just hasn't been done before, and it's not graphic. So, okay, fine, that's enough. What's the technology? So we use a lot of open source modules. We try to give back when we can. These are some of the modules we've given back to the community with. We've also submitted patches to a number of modules, many more that I can't even recall. But our guiding principle, so our business model, obviously this is a very simplified view. We found a huge hole in the market that we're going after because it coincides with something we're passionate about. We've done extensive research and we've hired some top industry experts to work with us on this. On the technical side, proven technologies. Think about Node. Node in the early days, everyone got excited about it. And you remember when Node forked? And then a couple of months later, Node unforked? And then someone deleted leftpad and broke the internet? So we're very conservative in the technologies that we use because Perl may be battle scarred, but it's battle tested. So it works. Very careful about our hiring. We're as strong as our hiring for this as we hire for our external clients. Very strong testing. And we try to keep our workflow fairly simple. So it looks kind of like this. So we check out, ticket names in there. We use Skitch for our database management, and we use DBX class schema loader to rebuild our schema classes as we go, because people shouldn't be doing that manually. Hack, hack, hack. We run a tool we call git-refresh. Note that's highlighted in red for a reason. We run our tests, then everything has to go through a code review. Now, a lot of people think, oh, that's Ovid. Ovid doesn't have to go through a code review. Oh, yes, I do. I know many of our devs are better than I am. I go through a code. I didn't at first because, Ovid. No, I go through code reviews now because they catch stuff in my code. It's important, and it really improves the quality of our code. Then we check out master. We do a git rebase, git merge. Because the git refresh, I'm tired of this, a typical Git history. So git refresh, I really won't go into details right now, but it looks kind of like this. We essentially, if you have any changes, stash your changes, rebase on top of master, pop your changes, get back to work. There's a little bit more in there, but it keeps things really nice and clean, and it means we've had a perfectly linear Git history. In the past year, that's gone nonlinear twice. So it makes git bisect and other things really easy. We're actually going to change this workflow slightly because this throws away branch information, and sometimes it's nice to revert an entire branch. But we keep things clean because we think it's important. Test suites. Everyone gets test suites wrong. This is my personal bugaboo. It very frustrates the heck out of me. You can go to ovid.github.io, read the Zen of test suites. But you might know a little bit about my personal philosophy on tests. I want them easy to write, easy to run, fast tests. They better be fast. The orders should not be important. You want very clean test output. Clean organization, that means tests should be discoverable. You shouldn't have to wonder where's the test for this feature. You should know where the test for that feature is because you can deduce it. You can think about it rather than git grep. Did we call that method somewhere in our test suite? And we don't want to duplicate tests either, just like you don't want to duplicate code. We're clean in our test suite. So testing, we use test class Moose for our test framework. We use Protractor for our front-end tests. That's supposedly for Angular, but you can use that for anything. Load testing. Right now, I wrote some Perl bots in that, which use Parallel Fork Manager. I forked off about 50 Perl bots to really pound our website, and it broke my laptop. So Perl wasn't going to work for that because, when you're load testing and it breaks your own box instead of the target box, that kind of sucks. I rewrote those in Golang, and ooh, Golang is fun. And we have over 15,000 tests, and we have test history, which everybody in this room wants if you write tests. Let's talk about test frameworks first. This is what ours looks like. So test for my project, use test class Moose. This is your base class. I'm not going to go into all the details. We have these various things which start and end transactions at the beginning and end of every class, and start and rollback save points at the beginning and end of every method. And that allows us to do stuff like this. So fixtures, we load in roles. And fixtures like stationary, that's baked into the game. That already exists. Other things like character, those fixtures are quite often loaded on demand. So loading the role doesn't create a bunch of data in your database. It only gets it created if you need it. So we're going to test boarding a shuttle. So we get character Ovid, we get the Tau station port, and then we're going to check that Ovid can travel to the port. And as you might guess, this can make a change to the database. And then we write a test to make sure that, is my station slug? I won't go into details. Is the station I'm on really the port? And then we have more tests beyond that. You don't have to clean up after yourself in the database. The base class did that for you because developers should just be able to write tests as quickly as possible, grab the fixtures they need, write the tests, get stuff done. Don't clean up because the test suite does that for you. It's important. So we run about 15,000 tests in about 15 minutes. It used to be faster, but we've got some pretty heavy-duty tests in there right now. The numbers don't add up because of the way XUnit frameworks count tests, but in the Perl world, that's 15,000 tests in 15 minutes. And those aren't unit tests. Those are full integration tests from the top all the way down to the database. I mean, some pretty heavy-duty stuff. And it runs pretty quickly, and that's on an older box. Because this is what usually happens. People run their test suites, developers run their test suites, and then they don't immediately, I'm running my test suite, I'm going to go and go to a meeting, or I'm going to go work on some other code because the test suite's already locked up their database, or I'm going to read a technical article. They faff about, they talk to the other developers, they read Facebook. Test suites, people run test suites, and they just stop working. I've seen this client after client after client, people run test suites, and they just don't work while the test suite's running. So you've just lost all that developer time. Faster test suites means faster development. Healthy test suites save a ton of money. So many times, once you realize that your test suite takes over an hour to run, you get your test suite down to about 10 minutes to run, you've got a full-size team of developers. That's like adding an extra developer's worth of productivity every single day without having to pay for them. And it's not just a brand new developer you hired, it's expert developers already on your team who know what they're doing. That's why test suites are so fundamentally important, why we really pay attention to them. So, and part of the problem with that is most Perl developers have been taught to test modules and not applications. Just like you're looking at an old legacy CGI script and you see SQL embedded directly in there, HTML's in here, docs, and stuff's cut and pasted, and there's no organization. That describes your typical test suite. Just as today you're building a modern web application, you're going to reach for Catalyst or Dancer2 or Modulicious or something like that. Reach for a framework for your test suite too. It'll save you a little bit of time up front, or it'll cost you a little bit of time up front, and it will save you a huge amount of time in the long run. And our test coverage, just so you can see what we're what we're actually doing, about 92% statement coverage. Some of our stuff isn't quite as nice, but the total down at the bottom is 83%. We're not doing bad. That would actually be higher, except devel cover doesn't cover necessarily the conditionals and subroutine signatures, and we use signatures very, very heavily in our code. So that actually artificially lowers those numbers. Speaking about signatures, Perl 5 version 26, they are no longer experimental. They will save you a ton of errors. You try to call something with 2 arguments, but it only takes 1, and you realize you can't set a value with that second argument. All sorts of great things, but they do have a couple limitations. Currently, when they throw an exception, they don't report the name of the method or subroutine, which has the problem, which means when you're in template toolkit, subroutine called with 2 arguments, expected 3 arguments, and template toolkit line 27. Yeah, maybe you'll find it in there. Good luck with that. Another one, this really catches people off guard. If you have a default value for a subroutine signature and you call it with like href no such key, you've just passed undef, which of course the default value doesn't trigger now because you explicitly passed a value. So you don't get bar equals 1 in that case. So they'll trip you up a little bit, but they're definitely worth the trouble. But that's just a side note. Let's talk about the test suite again, because I like tests, and you're kind of stuck in this room with me, aren't you? So I run this little utility called bin-test-failures.pl, and 233 test failures in our test suite is an absolutely unacceptable number. I like test suites. I like them to work. I don't want 233. And this is an embarrassment when I start looking at this. It's like 1.6% of the tests failing if it was to be a single run. But then I realized, oh, wait a minute. The utility that we're using to track our test history, that's all tests, which means branches too. So let's just look at master. Well, that's 0.4% errors. That's down to 67 test failures. That's looking a little bit better. But when you start looking at exactly what the test failures are, you notice the first and last occurrence of the errors. Many of those are old. So let's just restrict that to the last 2 weeks. We're down to 4 failures. When you can track test history, you'll start to see what things are regularly failing, when they've been failing, how healthy is our test suite. You can run this on Jenkins. We've got it in our Jenkins box right now, so I can grab that and see how we're doing historically over time. This is test class Moose history. It's not on the CPAN because it needs some love. It needs some interface help. If anyone else is interested and you use test class Moose, you really want to grab this history module just to see how it works. It creates a little SQL-like database. You can control where that database goes if you need to. And it doesn't require a particular source control. We use Git, but you pass it a branch name, you pass it some unique commit identifier, and the test runner for test class Moose, and you save it. And then you can ask it all sorts of questions about your test history or go into the SQL-like database directly and issue your own queries to find out how is my test suite doing. That's where our test suite tends to work fairly well. Major tools we're using for this, almost all of these, you'll see are open source except for JavaScript. That's an open standard, not an open source. But we really believe in open source, and there's nothing really exciting about this list except maybe Golang, which is up there. Most of that's just conservative. We're very conservative about our approach to technologies. So MVC. Catalyst, Template Toolkit, DBX class. Once again, there's nothing exciting about that because we want to provide a product for you and not provide this experimental thing or CV-driven development because we don't believe in that. We're having enough fun building a universe. But let's talk about MVC. Everybody seems to get MVC wrong. So here's a typical controller method we have for our clone vat. You need to purchase a new clone. It's pretty simple. Your character calls the purchase clone method. There is no logic in controllers. Do not put logic in controllers. Please stop doing that. How do you reuse that logic easily? If you want to write tests against that, you now have to go through like Mechanize or something like that in order to get at that logic, in order to test that. That logic belongs in your model. Call purchase clone. This particular page, we just forward back to the index. There's nothing there. There's just no logic. It's simple. It's easy. That is what your controller methods should look like. But let's talk about clone gestation. This is a little bit embarrassing. When you look at this clone, so clone, the gestate method, how might you gestate it? So first of all, the clone croaks if you're not in the method croaks if your character is not in the clone vat. Then it rummages around in the character's wallet to see if you have enough money, starts a transaction, we take some money from the character, gestates the clone, add some messages to the character so the character knows that they've got a new clone. And then, the messages show up on your screen like that. You purchased a new clone. You spent X amount of money. And that sucks. That's bad. The developer who wrote this, really, I'm very upset with them. They should be fired, but that was me. Why? Because why is the clone class caring about where you physically are? Why is it rummaging around in your wallet? Why is it doing things which are unrelated to the clone? It should the gestate method should just gestate a new clone, and that is all. So here's what it looks like now. So this is actually the purchasing of a clone, not the gestation of a clone. We have what we call economic exchanges, which is a declarative method of specifying long, complex change of character behavior, particularly when they're coupled together. You just list the steps. Location, self, is an area clone vat. Wallet, self, pay, the price. And then clone, self, the character, gestate in the area. The gestate method just knows how to gestate your clone. That's all it knows how to do. And having a declarative method of handling this is much nicer. So you can see the before and after on that. Here's another economic exchange, again, as we call them. This is how do you scavenge for goods. In this case, the ruins of a space station. If you want to try and find stuff which has been lying around, These are the economic exchanges we go through for that. Or here's how you consume a medical item. Inventory contains item, character, use medical item, inventory, remove item. Look at the code we're not writing for this. We don't have to write transactions or logging or exceptions or messages we send back to the characters or do any sort of error checking. We just declaratively state this is what you have to do because we built a system behind the scenes to handle these economic activities. So now, that's all you have to do. All you have to do is say what happens. It makes it much easier for developers when they want to develop stuff to do this. Sometimes there's a new action you have to write, so you have to go into the economic asset system in order to create a new asset and create the methods for it. And then you pop back up to this level, and you write your steps again. Really simplifies the code, and once you have them built, development can be very quick, and it makes the code more correct. You fix a bug for one of these, propagates to all of them. You don't have this logic duplicated all over the place. God objects. So, this is frustrating. How many of you have ever touched a God object in code? Yeah, how many of you have ever written a God object in code? Yeah, it's embarrassing. You work for me, you're fired. What do you mean holding up your hand? Sorry, Pete. So God objects are, if you're not familiar with the concept, basically you're packing too much responsibility into a single class. And that's because we want classes to maintain what we call the single responsibility principle. There should be one and only one reason for a class to change. Okay, so your character class. What's the single responsibility? Buy, attack, purchase, clone, consume, board, scavenge, rent, room, start education, join, start career, wow. This is an MMORPG. We're doing a lot of stuff for that character. So when we first started, I was doing stuff like this. So I said, okay, has missions for? Does an NPC have missions for someone else? So I'm going to put that in my missions class. So we have the if missions has missions for Alice, Bob, then, and I wrote that code, and I never remembered what it meant. Verb, subject, I had to look it up every single time to figure out what that meant. And I finally bit the bullet, and I said, okay, subject, verb, object, everything's going to be subject, verb, object if Alice has missions for Bob, and everyone knows what that means, except then you get into God objects again. Remember the clone class with gestate, where originally, it was rummaging around in the character's wallet and figuring out where the character was? I mean, that's frustrating trying to untangle that mess. That was the clone gestate method that we have down there. Originally, it was, causing us all sorts of problems. And I'm trying to think, how can I actually make that workable, though? It has to be maintainable. That is a huge problem because most systems, like you're writing some sort of e-commerce system, you have an order object, which has a collection object of item objects and a customer object. And you have a whole bunch of discrete things because you're managing a business process. We're trying to simulate a world. As you might imagine, that makes things a touch more complicated. So, I thought about partial classes. Partial classes are an artifact of code generation. Sometimes IDEs have them. Maybe you'll annotate an attribute with some things, and behind the scenes it creates a new class, or a partial class, which maybe has getters and setters and all sorts of other things. And when you actually compile the class, it takes all those little partial classes, and it merges them at compile time into one big class. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Roles, yes. Vir, partial class, character, clone, use moose role. We purchase clone, we've got our latest clone, we can respawn, we've got our decant time for the clone. And in our character class, we just consume our partial classes, clone, inventory, mission, movement. Actually, we've got about 34 roles that we put in there because this is a complex system that we're building. If those are hard to read, that's deliberate, sorry. Moving along. Partial classes logically divide aspects of the character so that every partial class has a single responsibility. Instead of the class having a single responsibility, we can write tests against that partial class for your single responsibility. This has been like this for about 3 years, and we're waiting for it to shoot us in the foot. this is bad, this is bad, this is not how you do OO code. But it works really well. So you might want to think about that if you ever get something like really complicated in the future, or you might think about something called ECS, which we'll get to in a moment. So items. Characters are a single class, but you might encounter hundreds, thousands of different items. Do you really want to try and write hundreds of thousands of different classes, or try and figure out how you're going to compose at runtime the different roles into the classes? And partial classes won't scale when you have thousands or tens of thousands of items in the game. So it's just, that's not going to happen. So think about your armor. Your armor protects you, so it's an armor class. But it's combat armor, so it shoots back. So it's a weapon. But you've been hurt, so it patches you up, so it acts like a med kit. You're scared, so it gives you a pep talk, so it acts as a psychologist. It could be all those things, more. I don't know what single responsibility means anymore in that case, because when you're trying to model a really complex system, single responsibility principle can be very limiting. In the late 90s, a game called Thief the Dark Project was released. Anyone heard of it? Awesome game, which was the very first game to introduce the entity component system and its code. Wonderful! Entity component system is one of the most wonderful things that's in the game industry. It's not known much outside the game industry yet, and oh boy, it should be. Entities are what we think of as objects. You got a gun. There's a med kit. There's a spaceship or whatever. You've got all sorts of objects. But don't think of them as objects in terms of classes or instance of classes. They're just a thing which you attach entities to, or components. So a component might be there's a medical component, there's an armor component. In the case of the combat suit, you would have a weapon component. There might be a mod component. There's all sorts of components you can attach to things. And then there's these systems that know how to inspect the components of entities to find out if they're applicable to that system. That's why it's called entity component system. So entities have 0 or more components, and they don't have behavior. You don't want behavior in them. It's not a way of doing object-oriented programming in the way we traditionally think of it. So this is what it looks like for a traditional game with a game loop. This is, if you know gaming, this is a tremendously oversimplified game loop, obviously. While a game is running, you get user input, you update state, you draw. What does update state look like? Maybe this is a game about animals running around in the forest, so they might hide from danger, forage for food, move, attack enemies. What does forage for food look like? Well, we're getting deeper into the system. And the forage for food method says for entity and entities, if is animal entity, search for food entity. There's no behavior on the entities themselves. Given different parts of the system, know how to inspect each entity to see if it has the appropriate components and can act on. So it's just data. It's just simple data. So this can be tough to scale if you have millions of entities. You just want to select the set of entities that might be in your local area or something like that. But it works out really nicely, particularly for ECS for the web. I don't know if anyone's ever done this before. We might be the first company. Maybe. We don't have a game loop. So behavior is driven by me clicking on something. That woman in a bar, I see the mission symbol, I click on her, and stuff happens, whatever. It makes complex behaviors really, really simple. But what does the code look like in Perl? This is an older version of ECS, but I decided to show this because it's easier to understand. So imagine this select statement at the top. We select global things like the item ID, the name of the item, something called a slug, which you can insert in the URL. You have your component armor, your component mod, your component weapon. These are the different components that you're selecting from item. Left outer join on all of those. If you're not familiar with an outer join, it means you're going to get a null, you're going to get some null results rather than failing to join where the slug of the item is blah. And down here, we have predicate methods. If is armor self, we check to see if the particular component ID is defined. Very simple way to put tons of complex behavior into one thing. Now, what's really interesting about this that people aren't aware of? Items in our game are immutable until they turn into an item instance, which means these tens of thousands of items you can cache. So this looks expensive, but caching is safe because they're immutable. So you want to install a mod like a genetic mod or a bionic mod. You got to go to the sick bay, you got to pay the price, and you install the mod. We have an economic asset for inventory. Install is just a method on that. And inventory is going to be the object it's going to be operating on, and then the mod's there. So in our system, we get down here, install, self-slug, we fetch the item, blah, 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 else if item is not is mod. And remember, the is mod is simply checking to see if component mod ID is defined, and that was just a left outer join on component mod. Wow, this makes things simple. For those of you sitting further in the back, I'm sorry you can't see the bottom of the screen on that. ECS is a powerful, powerful tool. It really makes things much easier to work with. And new developers, when they come in, they're looking at this. Once they get their head around it, some of the comments have been, wow, this is really pretty. They're impressed by it. Another guy said, I'm hired to clean. I don't see anything to clean. We do, but not the typical low-level stuff that a lot of other companies do. And others, we like this stuff. Plenty of work to do. Some think, what the heck were you smoking? But we're not done, because remember, I had 70 minutes, not 45. Science. This is a science fiction game. For me, Star Trek and Star Wars, they may be fun, they're not science fiction. You have, lightsabers instead of wands, but they're not science. Expanse is kind of hard-ish science fiction, not quite there. I like stuff like that. So I think science is important because if you read a typical fantasy novel, they might be fun, but it's really hard to reason about what the characters might do because their captain of the HMS makes shit up. That's just the way magic systems tend to work. This is science fiction, not scientish fiction. Well, it is scientish because we have to make compromises for games. So E equals mc squared. Spaceships have antimatter drives. E equals mc squared. Is there anyone here who has not heard of this equation? Thank you. So you can refactor this into, or rewrite this into m equals E over c squared. The matter equals, why would I care? Turns out Einstein's relevant to us. How much antimatter does it take to move a ship of a given mass a certain distance? So fuel consumption for self-distance, we have the speed of light squared. I actually tried to get that with the C superscript 2 by using UTF-8 to prove Damien wrong, but Damien hates me. It didn't work. So if you saw Damien's talk, you understood that. If you didn't. So we get our speed of light squared. We have my force equals kilograms times acceleration. This is kilograms of the ship. That's kilograms of the ship plus whatever cargo it might happen to have at the time. We then have the acceleration in g's of the ship. That gives us our newtons. Energy required to move the ship, that distance of that acceleration is force times distance. That gives us our joules, which means grams. Remember, we have kilograms here, so we have to multiply this by 1,000, is energy required divided by the speed of light squared. Oh, look, that's that down here. I can now return grams multiplied by the engine efficiency to calculate how many grams of antimatter it takes to move your ship a given distance. Which means you, as a player, when you're playing different aspects of the game, you can actually figure out stuff. You can guess, is this reasonable? So, how many people have heard of an Einstein-Rosen bridge? Okay, they're also known as wormholes. So we have wormhole travel between different systems. That's part of where we're kind of, playing a little fast and loose with science. They're not entirely unrealistic, we're not sure, but we actually have to have a game here. So information delay. Alpha Centauri is 4.4 light years away, but because of the wormhole, it takes about 2.1 seconds for the information to travel from a space station orbiting Mars to a space station orbiting Vercingetorix, the dwarf planet in the Alpha Centauri system. Which means on the chat system, you're going to have a minimum of 4-second round-trip delay if you're chatting with someone in Alpha Centauri. Or if they're in Tau Ceti, 12 light years away. You're going to have about, an 11, 12-second round-trip time if you're chatting with someone over there. That one, I think, is a little bit problematic because chat is one of the most important things for keeping players engaged in your game, and we're breaking chat systems by applying science. Maybe that's a bad idea. So, taustation.space, go out there, you can sign up for it. We're trying really hard to forestall the question you're going to ask, when is this going to be released? We're trying really hard to fight to get an alpha out by the end of the year, or hopefully close to the beginning of next year. You can go out there to taustation.space and sign up for our mailing list. It's very low volume. We have sent precisely 0 emails so far because we don't believe in spam. You can also follow us, twitter.com/TauStation. That's interesting because we have a lot of science news on that. Because if you're a science geek, we'll pay attention to a lot of the cool science news for you, and you can just follow it in our feed. And of course, if you want this quality for your company, you can just come talk to me, and we'll make this happen for you. But if you've seen my talks before, you know how it ends right now. Do you want bonus slides or questions? Every time, bonus slides, always, love it. So, bonus slides. I've got about 15 minutes, is this correct? So, if anyone's seen The Expanse or read the novels, really fun stuff. One of the things I've seen online, people complaining about, is the beginning of The Expanse, you've got the ice hauler on Ceres, the Canterbury. It's hauling ice from Saturn, and it's hauling it to the space station. I can't remember all the details. Basically, it gets blown up, and people are like, why would there be an ice hauler? Well, what does ice hauling have to do with science fiction? That's not fun. Well, the real world isn't always fun. The reality is, each of you consumes, people in the Western world, about a cubic meter of water every 2 to 3 days. You think you don't, but you're drinking, you're cooking, you're bathing, you're flushing, washing your car, watering your lawn, blah, blah, blah. We consume a lot of water, enormous amounts of water. So keeping the math simple, that's about 100 cubic meters of water per person per year. A cubic meter of water weighs a ton. So 100,000 kilograms per person per year. 10 people might need 1 million kilograms of water a year. Start to think about what a space station is actually going to need. So space station, maybe it has 100,000 people, 10 billion kilograms of water a year, 10 million kilograms if we're working at 99% efficiency, which you won't be able to even that far in the future. So the ISS right now, they were striving for they were looking for 85% efficiency in their water recycling, but some of their water was too acidic to be recycled efficiently. So they're at 70% efficiency, and they're mostly a sealed system. In the far future, airlocks are going to open and close. Ships are going to be using water for reaction mass. They're going to burn through a lot of water. Ice mining is going to be a major industry. And I've already told our narrative design team, if I don't get a mission called "The Ice Must Flow," someone's fired. That was for your Dune fans out there. So, orbital velocity. Oh, PowerPoint screwed up my subscript. This is for circular orbital velocity. I won't go into details, but basically, gravitational constant times the mass of the thing you're orbiting around, dividing them by the radius at which you're orbiting, tells you how fast something orbits around the planet. And that, for us, is, again, really important. So Tau Station, this is the information we fill in for Tau Station. That's a gravitational constant, which we have in our config files. That is the mass of the planet Mars. We multiply the radius at which it orbits by 1,000 in order to keep our terms constant. And this is comparing Tau Station to the International Space Station right now. We pay attention to this sort of stuff. Why? Where's the station? Well, you get the radians. For a particular date time, I know my orbital period of the station. I can compute the radians of where it is in its circular orbit, which means I can then get my x and y coordinates, which means at any time I can say, for this date, tell me where the station is, which means I no longer need to update my station's x and y information, which means I can now, so there's your distance formula, by the way, figuring out the distance between stations, because we have a lot of traveling between stations. The old shuttle schedule, we're updating this quite a bit. But what it means is I can cache my stations because they're now immutable, because I can calculate that. So we have star, we get our cache systems. This is our self-app cache stations for star ID blah. And inside our caching system, it kind of looks like this. There's some hand waving right here. We get our key, we get our filter criteria. We filter and cache based upon that key. And we call these, these are entity groups, basically. And so we get our stations. We have station set. We can include it for the star Sol. Get all the stations for the star Sol, sort it by name, exclude the affiliation. That's a government group called GOL. It looks kind of like DBX class. And when it gets passed to the template layer, it behaves exactly like DBX class in terms of iterators. But internally, we have slightly different methods to make sure that the developer is always aware, are they working on a DBX class result set or one of our cached result sets? Works out really nicely, and it's really reduced the number of SQL calls and improved our performance. Tau Law Credit Depot, that's a bank. People think Tau Law, that was just a reference to Tau Station. No, actually, the very first bank was the Tau Law de Quietat. It was the first known bank that kept records in 1401. We have little historical and cultural references baked all throughout the game, which you don't have to pay attention to, but it's there because we think it's kind of important. Oh, clone bats again. There's our archives that we had. Now for real questions. If anyone has any questions, please hold up your hand. Christian, yes, can you give him the mic, please?
Your stations orbit, but your planets also orbit.
I'm sorry, even with the mic, I could not hear you.
Your stations orbit, your planets also orbit.
We are coming back to that. That's going to be probably a post-beta feature. That I cannot even begin to address right now in the amount of time that I have left for questions. But the short answer is going to be yes, because that's important.
Hello. I have like two parts of the question, and the second depends on the answer on the first one.
Okay.
So are you aware about the
Now I can drink my beer.
Are you aware about Bartle taxonomy of the player types?
He's asking, am I aware about Bartle's taxonomy of player types? So you have the achiever, the socializer,
Yes.
the explorer, and the adventurer. There's actually a fifth type some people add called the trader for modern F2P systems. Yes. So we try to appeal to all of the player types in the game. So whatever type of player you are, there's a niche in our game that you would enjoy.
Okay, so the next question would be what the strategy you will take. I mean, different games take in different strategies. Like, I mean, they define in different percentage of the players to decrease retention of the players. So have you thought about this already and what the strategy you'd like to take?
Yes, so there's, there's a lot of work for that. So part of our retention strategy is, so there's something called the beginning, mid-game, and end game, and 5 character types. So we're going to be spreading, basically it's mapping out the character types against the different game stages and ensuring that every stage of the game we have something appropriate for that character that they will enjoy. So if we're looking at our chart and we're saying explorers don't have anything in endgame, we've screwed up, and we know that there's something that we have to do for that. Does that answer your question? I mean, it's not perfect, but it's also worth keeping in mind. Players tend to bounce between those types, even though they might have 1 or 2 core types that they adhere to. Any other questions?
So what can the killers do in your game?
So killers. Killers are griefers. It turns out they're actually, I didn't kind of want them, but this is a PvP world.
I'm one of them.
Okay. They actually help to bring some cohesion to the game because they're the enemy that some people fight against. And a lot of them, they're really happy to, go and hunt another human as opposed to hunting an NPC. So bounty hunting will come later in the game. There's more stuff involved with that. Brief description of the combat system. We're looking at 4 phases. Introductory phase when you initiate the combat. There's a long-range phase. There's a short-range phase. And then there's the ending of combat. There's going to be different weapons available. You'll have like a combat belt with some slots, which you can expand later on. You'll be able to, since this is your opponent generally won't see you attack because it's the web. It's not like graphics. So there is work done so that they can specify in the initiation of combat, if I see the other person, do I want to run? Do I want to call for the guards? Do I want to throw a grenade? Grenades actually have some important stuff there. So the combat system is designed so that, let's say you have 1 long-range weapon and 1 short-range weapon equipped. As you're closing in combat, whichever weapon you use will be important. You might be able to see that with the other players. So you'll be able to see sort of what they have as weapons and armor. You'll be able to see what you have. You'll be able to plan that out. So there's more with that now, but that's...
Can you attack people who aren't online, or it's like both people are online?
Currently, it's set up so you can attack anyone who's been online who has taken an action within the last 24 hours. So otherwise, you might wind up with thousands of people, who stop playing, because some do. Gloria.
So if people are wandering around talking to each other, how do you deal with the fact that missions, are kind of one-off? So if you have the trophy wife thing, and then you run into someone else who's like, oh yeah, I did the trophy wife mission yesterday, and this is the thing that happened to me.
So there's 2 aspects of that. One is if they're doing it at the same time, many times these NPCs are instanced. So I will see the trophy wife, and you will see the trophy wife, and we won't necessarily have the same one. Some NPCs can't be attacked, so we can avoid the problem of them being offline because someone else is trying to grief. The other instance is whenever something is proposed or discussed, one of the first questions I ask, if it's not clear to me, what is the narrative justification for that thing? You cannot even imagine the fights we've had over space station design, because I'm like, okay, narratively that's nice, scientifically that's awful, or this other thing we had a huge discussion about a mission where no, there's no more paper. This is a post-scarcity society, they didn't use paper anymore. Big discussion about that. Narrative justification is important, but there are times, because of the fact that it is a game, we do lose some narrative justification. And this is one of those times where it is difficult to avoid that. And in fact, eventually, there's going to be wikis out there where people will say, here's how you pass this mission in the wiki, and someone else might discover a hidden branch of the mission that no one else had known before. That'll get out to the wiki. So some of this will be people sharing the same stories, which maybe they encountered at a different time. You can't avoid that problem, unfortunately, as far as I can tell, at least not in this setup. There are ways to do it, but then you start moving to something called a sandbox type game, which we're not. Like EVE Online is a sandbox game. We're not. There, they can avoid problems like that, because if you destroy a thing, it is really destroyed. So we have a slightly different model. So does that answer your question? Okay.
You had the orbiting thing, so you can calculate where at a given point in time the station is. Are there any relativistic effects, like time moving at different rates?
Okay, I should have addressed that on my slides because everyone's asking me this. No, and part of the reason why is if you start looking into the efficiency of antimatter engines, to get something up to a relativistic speed, you'd start having more antimatter than the mass of the vehicle that you're actually trying to move. Most of the time I've calculated max relativistic speed for one particular thing came out like a 1% the speed of light. And you've got to start getting really close, like 90 percentile range before relativistic effects kick in. So we don't have anything which can possibly accelerate fast enough and long enough and have enough antimatter on board to get anywhere close to relativistic speeds.
I actually have a second question. You said one of the problems with core signatures was that the error message doesn't include the subroutine name. Have you considered a module such as function parameters, where...
We're trying to get to alpha rather than rewrite a lot of our game. So there's many times like stuff like this, it'll get brought up in it. It's like, that's a great idea. Does it help alpha? Yes or no? Do we need it for alpha? Otherwise, we might open a ticket and that goes into our post-alpha phase. So for a lot of stuff like that, it's like it could be a nice to have, but we don't need that for alpha yet.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. I've still got a few more minutes. Any other questions?
How much of the original work code is still there?
I don't have a clue how much original code is there. It depends upon what you mean by original. I mean, my first commit was just me running catalyst.pl to generate a framework. And of course, that's not really there so much. Regarding the size of the project, I checked the other day. It's a stupid metric lines of code, and I checked all the modules we include in Inc. with our other stuff, and it came out to about 600,000 right now. That's not counting documentation. That's not counting our database changes, that we manage via Skitch. That's not counting our tests. So there's a lot of stuff there, but I don't know what original ver code means in this context. But a lot of the stuff, particularly after we hired Toit, our F2P expert, we've been reworking in order to take advantage of our new understanding of what's going on with free-to-play. Any other questions?
So are you going to release the economic system so I can write a web shop in it?
So you can write what?
A web shop in it?
No, I will not be releasing that. It's tied too intimately into the game. So we want to release anything open source that we possibly can because we think it's important to give back to the community. But if we release stuff tied too close to the game mechanics, then we give away game mechanics, and that destroys a lot of the value of the game. Or someone else could just install their own version of Vir and Tau Station and run away with that. Shoot me an email later. This isn't quite what you're looking for, but there's an interesting paper that we've been looking at for agent modeling of artificially intelligent self-balancing economic systems that we've been investigating for our elite style trading. And that's kind of cool if you like stuff like that.
I missed the first portion of your speech, but have you made anything available currently, or is the entire code base still protected until alpha release?
But the code base is not going to be open source because we can't. Again, we're giving away game secrets. I show little snippets here. These slides actually won't be online, generally because they don't make a lot of sense with the talk. We also find that if we make promises, players get really upset if they say, oh, look at these slides that you posted 17 years ago. You didn't keep that promise. And also, some of the gameplay might change. But
I'm more curious as to the mathematics that you've done, the calculations and gravitational orbits and orbital velocities and such.
So if you go to taostation.space, we have a link to our blog, and you can start reading on there, and that covers many different aspects. We cover the artwork, we cover the technology, we cover some of the math. I don't know how much of the math we cover on that, but ping me afterwards and say, I'd like a blog post which covers more of that, because not all of our blog posts are going to appeal to everyone. So something just narrow about math and science, yeah, that'd be great. I think don't we have one for that, guys? Oh, you're useless. We have some of our developers back there. You can wave. Ilya's not here. I don't see Ilya. Okay, well, anyway. So yeah, if you don't find it on taostation.space, just shoot me an email and say, hey, what's going on? And I think one more question, real quick.
Microphone, yes. One nice thing about text-based games is they are easy to interface. What will be your bot policy on that game? You're programmers, after all.
We don't know yet. There are some problems with bots that we might eventually have to have CAPTCHAs on in order to prevent. We're not sure. But we're also considering the possibility of later on opening up our API so people can write their own interface to it if they don't like ours, if they want to put it on mobile, if they want to play it from a command line. So that's a consideration, but we need to get to alpha first. So thank you very much, everyone.